Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back to another Warframe lore video. And today I want to do something a little different, because a lot of the stuff, as I started rambling about in the last video that I did, that has come out recently, has like all of this discussion, all of these things have been stimulated by the apostasy prologue. And for just to clarify, apostasy is where you denounce a religion or a political view and therefore become kind of an outcast, a pariah, and condemned by that, kind of like being heretical, but not necessarily kind of contravening or kind of trying to directly counteract the belief that you're questioning, but purely just renouncing it and moving away from it, which is seemingly what Margulis did. But as a result, there's one character in the game that is now in the game because we have seen him as part of this apostasy prologue, even though we have heard his voice a lot and he has told us a lot of things. And that character is Ballas here, who was an executor of the Orokin before the fall. So basically, he's one step below the emperors, whoever and whatever they may be. And he's been whispering to us in the form of the memories that we've seen in various quests so far, both in terms of the second dream, and I think he had something to say in the War Within. Could be wrong. We'll get onto that in a minute. Because what I want to do with this episode is firstly take a look at a couple of issues with the way that people have been discussing this character and what he has told us before, why this character is possibly the most important one that we have seen thus far, and then actually go through what he tells us and what it is actually more likely to mean in the context of everything else that we already know. So first off, again, the one of the things that stands out about this character is not just that he is this Orokin executor, and if it wasn't already, by the way, a clue at the top, we're going to be talking spoilers here, guys. So if you've not played through it yet, if you care about being spoiled, then what are you doing here watching me? Go play the game and come back. Otherwise, that's what we're going to get into. Be prepared. But so one of the reasons though why this individual is an important character that kind of stands out is because he's the only character that has absolutely no reason to lie. So Teshin can't lie, but Teshin doesn't know everything. Teshin has to follow the person who has and controls the Kuva. All very well and good, but at the same time, he was a seemingly slightly higher ranking, but still very low ranking Dax warrior. And as we find out in the War Within quest, the Dax, and arguably from some of the comics as well, the Dax seem to be very uniform in who they are and what they are. And so as a result, you've got, for instance, the comic where we see Cephalon Suda volunteering herself to go and be turned into a Cephalon, or when previously she was a historian, and she has come to be collected by a troop of Dax soldiers with Octavia leading them. And in that instance, the Dax are all very similar. They're all very straightforward and the same. But then in regards to and as a result, they don't have a lot of information. Lotus has lied to us time and time and time again. As much as she's a caring individual, she is possibly on the neurotic side of things, and therefore is not the most reliable or useful sort of person to provide information with us. And then most of the other people that we've got around us at the moment don't even remember the old war. They remember the corpus have been around for a while, like Darvo, who is considered a young corpus, is over 100 years old. And so the lifespans of people are obviously still very long overall, but at the same time you've got this issue of no one apart from the Cephalons, who each have their own agenda, with the exception of Ordis, who is broken and who has continually wiped his own memories. Lotus and Teshin are otherwise people that remember what happened before. Other individuals that might, are people like, or characters like Hun Hao, but he fucking hates us. He's not telling us shit. So the only person, though, that has the level of power and confidence in themselves to just divulge information, they have no reason to hide it, they have no reason to lie, is Ballas. Because so far, every time he's been talking, he's not been talking to us. About us, maybe, but not to us. And there's a thing in the Apostasy prologue that I want to touch on that everyone else seems to have touched on a little bit, but otherwise seems disconnected from. But the thing that stands out to me is in almost every single one of the videos that I've been kind of seeing pop up and all the rest of it, they've all been referring back to the wiki pages. And I'm going to do this as well. But I'm not going to do it in the way they have, because they have been scrolling down to this part, the trivia, and going, oh, well, in the Saren Prime introduction video, his dialogue indicates that she was meant to fight the infestation. Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But then the next one is, well, this implies that the Corpus were active during Orokin times. No, the Orokin had a Corpus. Each individual Orokin, especially the higher up they were members of a Corpus. Corpus was just a family, but the families weren't normal. I think it's one of Samaris's data unlocks, one of his synthesis unlocks, that actually has them discussing how corpuses were basically cloned families from a similar gene seed rather than biologically created offspring. And so it stands out that actually, yeah, we know they are. This is why Hun Hao calls Alad V an Orokin, because Orokin is just another word for human by this point. They took over the entire solar system. That was the entire culture. Human was the species name. Orokin was the name of the collective society and all of those who were part of it. So lots of people have been coming back and referring to this as lore. And the thing is, the wiki it's fan curated, it's fan added to. And so as a result, for some of the trivia, some of the speculation and stuff that is still here, it's about as worthwhile as anyone else's theory, anyone else's analysis. And this is where I want to kind of take a look and get into what he's actually told us so far. In which case, we've got the Ballas quotes page, which is incredibly useful because it puts it all down in writing in front of us and allows us to take a look at it word for word and see how he's saying it, how he's forming his ideas, how he's forming his sentences, and how he's actually describing what's going on. And so I want to go through this as we've come across it, and kind of break down what he's saying, what he's thinking, what he's doing, because there's stuff in here that then I can put in context in regards to the rest of the stuff we already know from Samaris' scans, from the Cephalon fragments, from some of the new lore from the planes, in regards to Korra's stuff, and in regards to the myths about the Unum and all those kind of things. We can take all of it in that context of the stuff that we already know and rework it. And as a result of reworking it, we can then try and make more sense out of it. And Ballas basically tells us what the Warframes are. Like, as parts of this. He describes certain things and he lets us know about certain things. And so they're vague, because everything in Warframe is vague. But it's stuff that I want to break down and get into. And before people start yelling at me, yes, this is speculation, but it's informed speculation, and so I'm going to sound confident even if it turns out to be false in the future. In which case, that just means I make another video and talk about what the differences are between what my thinking is now, based on what I'm seeing here, and what we're talking about in the future. So I'd love to talk theories. I'd love to talk to discuss all of this stuff. But again, you guys know from all of my other videos, especially my coaching videos, evidence is what I focus on. And so if I haven't had any kind of evidence for what I'm thinking here, then I wouldn't be saying it. So let's start at the beginning. So the second dream is where we have a lot of his stuff here. So when we're going to jump into the moon and see what's going on, we start hearing him talking to Margulis, and so he's one of the first thing he says is what they need Margulis is to be destroyed. They're devils from that hell, not human anymore. And to that he's talking about us, because at this point it seems like we've already blinded Margulis, which is a thing that we know we have done. We literally, there was one kid trying to be an Excalibur without an Excalibur, and so let off a kind of a radiant flash that was maybe a little bit too bright and burned out Margulis's eyes, which is probably another reason why we've never seen anything above this part of her face. But Ballas is obviously not a big fan of us, probably because we hurt his lover Margulis. Just saying. At which point then she's defending us because she treats us as her children. We are in her care. She understands that we don't mean to do these things, and she wants to help us. She wants to direct us, to improve us, to use the power that we have in a constructive fashion almost, or rid us of it completely. And so then he asks how she can defend them after they have harmed her in such a significant way. And this is the thing, there's one thing here that stands out to me. We know that continuity is a way that Orokin, especially high-ranking Orokin, were able to jump body from person to person to person to allow them to extend their lives hugely. When you've already got people like Darvo, for instance, who are considered young at 100 years old, it's a case of, okay, so let's say that they've got to 500 years being the maximum age limit for the average human, in which case that's 2 bodies per 1,000 years, and yet here it's a case of Margulis being a lower caste, an Archimedean, a scientist. She's seemingly not got the option just to jump body to have her eyes replaced, or to jump body to kind of work with that. And it's a case of, okay, so she can't jump body. Technology seems to be able to allow her to see, fine, but beyond that, that's her limit. And we know that Kuva seems to be quite rare, and in terms of the Kuva that is used for continuity, which I want to talk about in another video anyway. But in regards to the situation that's here, she can't just use Kuva to jump body. It seems, even to from what we see in the comic around Cephalon Suda's creation, it seems like Kuva being granted to someone, even to turn them into a Cephalon, is a great honor. So the fact that it seems to be this thing that is very, very restricted to maybe the top 2 echelons of Orokin society, the emperors and then the executors, and we still don't know anything about the emperors. They are addressed maybe once in everything that Ballas says here. So even Ballas doesn't seem to interact with them all that often. But then she continues to protest about the way that he treats them. But then he's telling her to hush. He calls her wilted because she's been damaged. But he's saying that he can't protect her and she's going to have to renounce before the 7. So that's the 7 executors, Ballas and his bros, who are basically the ones that run Orokin society. They're the top end of the political spectrum, bar the emperors. And so the thing that stands out here is that when they're talking here, this is the day before her sentencing, and yet he's very down on it, and yet she seems to have renounced the Orokin and the Empire and the Emperors and the Executors and everyone else above her, including her lover, because of the way that they are treating these children. And as a result, even her lover's like, look, I can't do anything about it. And this is the thing. We see in a minute that maybe he could have done a little bit more. Because then when we actually get to protecting the reservoir in the second dream, we find out this is the scene around, to one extent or another, that jumps forward in time several points. In which case, it seems like this is maybe after her trial. And 7 hands raised. So even Ballas was so pointed towards kind of she is an apostate. She is striding away from us. That even he ruled against her. Suggests he's a maybe not as straightforward as he could be. But again, there could be other reasons for this. Like we see later on that there's a slight difference in what we see here to what we see later. But he says that the judgment is, and then he pauses, and that's because we see later on that it's not actually death necessarily, but it's death as far as he's concerned. She will disappear from his life. And he asks her why is she doing this? But anyway, then it jumps forward. And someone's talking to him, and he's talking about the rejects that they've consigned to Lua, us, the Tenno, that they stuck in the somatic links and just left there. And they're calling it transference, which is the shift from us into the Warframes. At which point, though, then we seem to jump forward again as the Warframes have been built, as the transference is happening, and now he seems to be talking to another Executor, being kind of upset about what they're suggesting, and they seem to be suggesting that we'll be used to save the Empire, using the Warframes, our void powers, to win against the Sentients. And he goes, look, I know we're desperate. So in other words, yes, the Sentients had the Orokin on the back foot. And they had them quite severely on the back foot for someone as high up as Ballas to straight up admit to one of his fellows that, yeah, we're desperate, we need something. But we aren't Dax soldiers. And he says that these are golems possessed by devil minds. So at which point, he's basically talking about, yes, we do need to unleash the Warframes, potentially, but they're not just normal soldiers. They are odd, strange, composite creatures possessed by children with void powers. In which case, I think this might be where we see Ballas potentially looking to create a handler for us so that we don't have this issue. And this is where possibly we're going to see, and where some other people have talked about this as well, where we're potentially going to see that Ballas might have been involved in helping Lotus get into our ranks, poking us to kill off all of the Emperors and as many other Executors as we could. So, we'll see. But anyway, then we get on to apostasy, and when he's talking about the other bits and pieces, he's saying he told Margulis not to speak out and all the rest of it, but then he's asking for her forgiveness. Why? Because he voted her down as well. He voted for punishment also. But then the sentencing and the last kind of set of moments that we have, we find out why he paused when referring to it as death. Because when it comes to her sentencing, Honoured 7, we have gathered here today to carry out the sentencing of Archimedean Margulis, You face the Jade Light, recant, and we will grant a merciful death. So again, death is something that can legitimately be placed on her, because seemingly she's not these shiny gold people that can move on from death, have no fear of death. And this makes me think that everyone below the level of Executor, none of them used Kuva. None of them had access to it. It was purely for those top couple of levels. And so death was still an option for pretty much everyone other than those at the top. But also the Jade Light. Now, facing the Jade Light as a separate option from death, what's a fate worse than death? I feel like, considering what we're going to hear in a second, when we go on to those next couple of lines, where he says, when Lotus says that she isn't Margulis, he says, but of course you are, imprisoned, just as she was. In which case, the Jade Light, seemingly, is a means by which of compacting and imprisoning someone. Which again makes me think that possibly there's a situation between Lotus and the body that she's using, and then the situation that's going on here. And before I move on to the rest of the stuff, he says that he won't abandon Margulis again and all the rest of it. But when we're seeing that, the thing that stood out to me was that, first off, we just start from our ship and we just kind of portal our way onto Lua. We find our way through Lua and down to Lotus's chamber, which seems to be another big somatic link type device. But also, when we actually get down there, Ballas, we shift from our Warframe to our operator, and then Ballas doesn't seem to see us. As he walks over and disconnects Margulis from Lotus from her link, we see the same kind of rippling effects that we see in regards to all of the rest of the stuff that's going on with transference. And so I've got a couple of ideas how this impacts Lotus and what might have happened at some point. But in regards to this situation, where we're seeing Margulis and Ballas in the same place, or Lotus / Margulis and Ballas in the same place discussing, when she takes off her helmet and drops it on the floor, she's left that there for us to get. She's left that memory there for us to see. It's a projection. It's not happening when we see it. And that's why we randomly get this purple floating orb in our rooms. It's the transmission that she has sent us to lead us to that thing, to lead us to that place, to get her hat, I guess, for want of a better word, and to see what has happened to her. She wouldn't do that if she was completely on board with Ballas. She left us those breadcrumbs. She couldn't necessarily fight against him, as has been suggested in various dev streams. He's got that big old sword and that big old arm, and he knows how to use them. And Lotus seems significantly kind of squishy. But she goes with him but leaves us the breadcrumbs. She leaves us the trail to follow. She leaves us the information to remember and to hear as part of us following her traces to see what's going on. So there are two things that I want to highlight from this. Firstly, Lotus as a sentient who cannot withstand the void has always been on the moon. She was only able to leave that chamber that she has on the void once we had brought it out of the void and into real space. That's interesting. Is that chamber that she was in some way able to prevent the void from harming her more, rather, causing more degradation than just sterility whilst she was in there? It's going to be interesting to see. But secondly, if Lotus has access to the semantic link and she told us as Warframe kids to go to sleep. You've done your job, you've finished your job, go to sleep. When we went to sleep, could she still have taken control of all of the Warframes? We know that sentients are able to command entire armies. You know, when we fight them, when we fight Hunhao, he has numerous units on the field at a time. The Eidolon, or rather the Eidolons, and all of the various bits and pieces that are floating around, they're all connected to one sentient. So it wouldn't be a big stretch for Lotus to be able to take control of numerous other devices in terms of the Warframes. But also, the Warframes may very well have just been, once let off their leash, gone and done this on our behalf. So I feel like this actually, something that we've been told again and again and again throughout the whole game, is that we betrayed the Orokin. We caused the downfall. We destroyed. There's a bit of wiggle room here because of what's being said and what we're seeing that might suggest that we're not actually responsible in terms of us as the operators of the Warframes. So the next thing that I want to go through is the conversations that Ballas has as a result of the various trailers that we've seen, the Prime trailers. And so the first one that we've got is Sarin Prime, where he goes, Margulis, from your winter ashes there has sprung a field of flowers, conceived by me, germinated for deadly purpose. You used to dream of old earth, didn't you? Bathed in gold and solemn blue. I intend to reclaim it now from the spores and the ruin. It came to me like a proverb, fight poison with poison. Cure this sick horde with the greatest of plagues. I will call her Sarin. In which case, we kind of understand that Ballas was the executor that was overseeing Margulis's work anyway, including the work that then Sylvanas came on to do as well. And so with kind of this going on, and the fact that he's overseeing the entire project, it would make sense that he's potentially got a very directive point to make in this. We know, for instance, that there were, from like the Rhino Prime lore entry, that there were other scientists working to develop the things, the various Warframes. But in this particular instance, the Primes were the ones that were seemingly fashioned by those at the top of the chain. They were the Orokin originals. They were the ones that were better than everyone else, that mass production then diminished somewhat. In which case, seeing this here, where he's talking to Margulis, but from her winter ashes, I feel like this is, she's gone. She's already been hit by the Jade Light or been killed or whatever. And so now he's going, well, from the winter ashes you left, i.e. us and the work that she had done on transference to help us control our powers, he's now seeing kind of a fruitful result from her endeavors. And he says, conceived by me and germinated for deadly purpose. So he has been the one that's coming up with these Warframes, coming up with their ideas and putting them, getting them created. And so he goes, okay, so you've been dreaming of old Earth, you want it restored, as arguably Sylvanas did as well. But obviously they kind of messed up again with the Technocyte virus when they unleashed it and caused more infested. But then he's going, okay, well, I intend to reclaim it now from the spores and the ruin. Okay, fine. And then he's going, well, this is the idea that I had for a Warframe. And so he's basically, at that point, he's basically just saying, I'm a game dev, here you go. But ultimately, this is him telling us that he was still in charge of the project around us, the Tenno, and around the Warframes anyway. But then also that potentially we owe some of our abilities to him, whereby he has actively tried to promote certain things. So it's not a case of the Warframes channeling our void energy into powers that we choose. it's a case of the Warframe has been designed specifically with a purpose based on the wants of the Orokin, most specifically Ballas, to then achieve some goal. But anyway, the next thing, moving along, is with Vauban. And this is one that people go, oh, the Corpus were operating at the same time. And it's like, well, yeah, but we knew that because the Orokin and the Corpus were the same during the time that Ballas was operating. Then he goes, lust was my sin. In other words, yeah, lust after Margulis, I would imagine. Lust after power, lust after control of the things that he wanted. But greed is the blight that weakens our steel. So in other words, he's going, okay, so I lusted after Margulis, and that weakened me to allowing this to not be weaponized earlier, to something to that extent. You know, he's talking about the I feel like the talking about weakening of steel is in this case probably as much as it's metaphorical. I feel like there's an element of it being literal as well. But these industrialists have gorged on the harvest of our long war. In which case, I don't feel like he's talking about the various other bits and pieces that's happening beforehand. I feel like he's talking about the people who are below the executors, who are fashioning their new warframes, who are fashioning their new equipment. The long war, the old war, took potentially 4 eras of whatever Orokin time to fight, because those are the eras that we see in the Void relics. That we've got 4 eras there, and the warframes don't start operating with those kind of weapons until like we're firstly fashioned. We've had the warframes created for us, but also it's a time for those things to be developed and grown throughout the war. And so I don't think the war's necessarily been won yet. I feel like he's just saying, there throughout the entirety of the war, Margulis is already dead, fine, but Margulis was dead, jade lighted, whatever. But that happened before we were even given access to warframes. So she dies probably just before, a year or so before, at the very least. The first Tenno is given a warframe to operate. In which case, the war might be going on, but it only actually takes a kind of big kick forward a year after Margulis' death. In which case, if he's talking about her, he could be saying this a year after she's gone. The industrialists, the people who aren't executors, who want to climb the ladders and who want to make sure that they have as much wealth and power as possible, they've been able to just sell because everyone wants protection against the sentients and being able to fight in the war. But he goes, their mind drones, their mechanizations toil in foundries remote. Mind drones, neural sentry? ? But then he goes, for what purpose? We must set watch upon them, baiting our snares with the worms of profit. So he goes, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to we need to keep a handle on these people, because they're making weapons, they're making a living, they're doing all of these things, but they're gaining power because of it, and we need to make sure that they don't gain too much. And so we need to make sure that they fall into a few pitfalls, a few traps on our behalf, and we'll just do it by throwing coins down there for them to follow. Those kneeling at the altar of commerce will be returned to the void. So those who are worshipping commerce and not the executorship or the emperors will be dealt with. At which point then he's going, for your consideration, Vauban, someone who would probably send people back to the void. But also he's always been a prison guard, essentially. He locks people up. He's a siege engineer and prison guard. And so Valban being the one that's here in this description of, you've got these industrialists and they're causing us a problem, but we're going to trap them, we're going to lock them away and dispose of them if needs be. Here is the Warframe that is capable of doing that for us. And we know that, for instance, Octavia was there to do fairly straightforward guard work, from the comic where Cephalon Suda was taken to be, or Suda was taken to be created, turned into a Cephalon. So we know that they were doing this kind of thing. But what he's saying is basically that just Valban is a Warframe that can police these people for us. Necros Prime. Fear is a weed, snaking in the dark. It vines within the mind. Sorry, corrupting it. It germinates within tribes, dividing them. Your graces, possibly the emperors more so than the executors, because earlier we see him calling his fellow executors just executors or the seven. So your graces suggests potentially higher level of reverence. So potentially he's presenting this to the emperors, because we know they took an interest, because they were there. We either we or the Warframes or whatever killed them all, so we know that they took an interest. But your graces, we who are beyond death, i.e. emperors, executors, have forgotten the simple power of fear. Yeah, because as we see in the memories of Orden Karras, Ordis before he was turned into a Cephalon, they didn't give two damns about being killed. They laughed and they smiled and they didn't care. And then they were like, well, that's fine. We can just get this person into a new body. He'll be fine. That's not a problem. We can kind of pull this person up potentially in some kind of Cephalon-like state, ready for transferal into a new host, so that we can get which one they would prefer most. That's fine. Or if, as we've seen in a couple of other places, like some of the other Samaris entries, potentially they specifically cultivated those in their corpus to one extent or another to be backup straight away if something was amiss, if they got murdered or something like that. But he goes, now let us remember, you will find no greater power than the simple thought of your own name inscribed upon a grave. Our harbinger, our terror, Necros. So in this particular instance, I feel like he's talking about how there are tribes that are maybe outside of the Orokin, or from different systems even, that are hard to be they're hard to control, but fear is the way to control them, and use of this Warframe is a way of doing it. However, this part where he goes, you will find no greater power than the simple thought of your own name inscribed upon a grave, that could be a veiled threat, or it could just be a legitimate sales pitch. We won't know until we hear more from Ballas on the subject. But anyway, moving on. Banshee Prime. Now this one lots of people have taken to mean the Grineer, but I have a slightly different take on this based on some of the stuff that we've seen around VK7 and Korra in some of the lore that's come out of the some of the lore that's come out of the ghouls, some of the lore that's come out of the Plains of Eidolon stuff more recently. But anyway, he says, these like-faced savages, these earth-born mules, are a vast, violent ocean at our command. Now, lots of people go, oh, well, they're pack horses and they're savages and they all have the same face, and they're a violent ocean, so they must be the Grineer. I go, no, hold on. The executors, possibly a few other high-ranking individuals, and the emperors. Let's say you've got 7 emperors and 7 executors. It's 14 people. You've got a few others that maybe in some way have been granted the ability to consume Kuva, to live forever, to do really well, as with Orden Karras. And I feel like the reason why Orden Karras was capable of doing that, or why they wanted to gift that to him, was simply because the way that we've been told they get that kind of honor was to complete the Halls of Ascension. So Ballas has completed all the Halls of Ascension by himself that we have completed in our Warframes. And Auden Karras probably could have done that as well, and it was probably just a case of them going, this guy is a major badass on the battlefield. He could just we could blindfold him and send him into the Halls of Ascension. He'd come out fine on the other end. Give that man some cover. In which case, it's they're saying that you've got this the whole of the Orokin Empire, the Grineer at the bottom, the various corpus families filled with Archimedeans and Secutors and Lorists and historians and everybody else. They're not these godlike, deathless entities that the Executors and the Emperors have become. They all look the same. They all actually have to work. Then there's a vast ocean of them, billions of them, across at least 3 systems I think we've had mentioned, possibly 4. And so as a result, he's talking about the Orokin Empire. He's not talking about anything else. He goes, yet they wither. Well, yeah, because the Orokin are mostly still human. The Executors may not die and may be able to continue and prolong their lives indefinitely unless they want a new body so then they can transfer across to one. But everyone else, they might have very long lives, but they're still dying. Then he goes, mired within massed flesh, steel and flesh. Well, yeah, because they're still having to kind of work, and if you're sending them into battle, if you're talking about Dax troops, it's all just flesh and steel. Like Teshin's hat is just metal, his armor is metal. And he goes, casting these hordes from gene molds and flock mines, we inspire nothing. Well, yeah, Teshin is a fine example again of this, of a Dax soldier who maybe was a bit older, who was able to train others potentially. He seems to have been one that was well decorated enough and well recognized enough to then come and deal with us and train us. But he goes, well, they're born from gene molds and flock mines. Well, we know that there was some kind of collective mind control over the Dax because they were presented as in the War Within. They couldn't deny anyone that controlled Kuva. They couldn't act against those individuals. They just couldn't do it. It was only after the staff with the Kuva on it was taken away from the Grineer Queen that Teshin was able to do a damn thing. And that's if you let him. So they're not inspiring anything. They just control them. And we know, again, from some of the Samaris unlocks, that the corpus today reproduce biologically, but before that, the corpus families in the Orokin Empire were grown. They weren't born from parents. They didn't have anything like that occur. It was simply a case of a gene seed being thrown into a vat and out popped a person at some point. But anyway, he goes, our demons of void womb must be different. So in other words, us. They must be unusual, singular, crafted without caste. So in other words, they can't be attached to the castes. He's talking about the people, and then he starts talking about the Warframes, essentially. And so the Warframes are crafted from people. Now this shouldn't be surprising, because again, as I said in my last video, Dark Sector gave us the blueprint for everything that is now happening in Warframe. Not in a connected lore kind of way, but what was the Warframe in Dark Sector? It was a soldier with singular abilities, singular disfigurements, singular issues, being infected with technocyte and put inside a shell, put inside the Proto-Excalibur Warframe rig, I guess. And so what he's saying here is that what goes inside those Warframes should still be clones, but it must be clones of those that they can manufacture the genome of that stand outside of your Dax warriors, outside of your other low guardians, outside of your Grineer, outside of your executors, your emperors, anything else. They need to be specifically crafted, and this is why, when they have then thrown those genetic sequences that they have crafted very specifically into a gene mold to grow them out, or into a vat, however it is that their cloning tech works. Once they've done that, that's created a new person of a sort, which is why every single Warframe has a different physical profile. Saren got that big backside and those thighs and hips. Fucking Oberon has tiny feet. You've got the incredibly slender female frame of Mesa. You've got the very bulky male frame of, say, Rhino or Atlas. So they have been specifically built from the ground up, from the finest ore, i.e. meaning the best genetic material. They must be slender and queer, is what he says. And it's like, okay, fine. They probably will be, because you're going to be forcing them into a bloody Warframe. And then he goes, sight without eye, wrath without sound. So in which case, yeah, well, once they've been infected with technocyte and shoved inside a Warframe, we're faceless. We're expressionless. And we're mute. Something that has been said time and time and time again throughout the whole game is that we are mute. We don't make a sound. We somehow manage to communicate, possibly by proxy, with people, with our allies. But otherwise, we don't talk. When we're in the Warframe, we're deadly silent. The only one that isn't is Valkyr, and she just screams. She yells and she roars, and that's it. So potentially, that's what he's talking about. We're expressionless. We're not a soldier, but a myth. Not a warrior, but a spirit. Again, we're not soldiers. In I think it's the Mag Prime Codex entry, we see a Mag Prime going through jump with a crew of other soldiers and coming out into a fight against a sentient ship. And it's a case of, yeah, they weren't just a soldier. They were this silent, unseeing, spirit-like entity that is then likened later in that entry to an angel. And we have been called war gods and things like that as well. We're far and beyond what would be for a normal warrior. And it's because we have been crafted from the finest genes that have then been infected with the most empowered technocyte. And something else I'd point out is that lots of people go, oh, well, they lost control of the technocyte and it took over Earth. Yeah, but look at the neural sentry on the Orokin Towers in the Void. The neural sentry is still able to control the ancients that are wandering around, the infested ancients. And it's like, we know that we have a spine, we know that we follow a human form, and we know that they can control the technocyte virus to a point. Maybe not in super huge concentrations, or where it's able to take grasp, but generally, we know that they can. In which case, looking at something like Helminth, for instance, aboard our ship, it's controlled, it's limited. It hasn't overrun our ship. It's got its own limited intelligence that doesn't reach out to other infested elsewhere. They're able to do that. So they would easily be able to create this person from the best genetic stock, infected with technocyte, to modify, shift, change, alter it in ways that they were then able that they then had it be able and usable by us to channel void energy from a great distance with transference. And then they could enclose it in the Warframe armor and leave it to settle. And this is where something that spans off into Umbra. Umbra have been out in the dark and they've been doing other stuff. And we'll talk about that when we get down to it in a minute. But it seems to be that there's an interesting set of stuff that's happened around that, which relates back to who went into those suits in the first place. Anyway, Valkyr Prime. Our long, deathless winter has left us numb. Our wasted animal within, ugly and gaunt, hibernates beneath our shimmering beauty. Why do these warframes stir us so? They burn with our lost desires, lost instincts, Tenno tamed but only just, cast and hunted as game, trapped and tortured, yet they remain animals. Less than their human seed, gnawing their limbs from the snare, devouring a banquet of suffering, obese with heat and acid and rage. That is why they will destroy us. So, at this point, it seems like Ballas has been overseeing it and developing the Warframes. They now have a name for quite some time, and he's basically saying it's almost like going, oh, well, social media will be the end of us. And that's what he's saying. He's saying that we no longer experience these animal urges. You know, it's in us somewhere, but we're shiny and we're beautiful, and because we don't die and we are static, it doesn't stir us anymore. But the Warframes do. Why? Because they are animalistic. Look at Rhino just charging through a corridor and eating people in the Rhino Prime entry in the Codex. They have so much to kind of emotion and aggression and drive, but then the Tenno, it says that they're Tenno tamed, but only just. So in other words, the consciences behind the Warframes are still there. He's talking about the Warframes. He's not talking about the Tenno. He's saying that we tamed them. Why? Because we're this potent void power that has made it so. But then cast and hunted as game. So I feel like the way that they have tested to find out which gene strands are then going to be useful to go and throw into the arena and see what kind of Warframe they can turn out of them, is that they have made this special gene cast. They have then thrown them into arenas where they are hunted, where they are trapped or tortured, and then they remain animals until they are then put forward. And then he describes them better. He goes, less than their human seed. Human seed. Again, confirming that what went into making the Warframes was human. Gnawing their limbs from the snare, devouring a banquet of suffering, obese with heat and acid and rage. So he's saying that they are diminished. The Warframes, what remains within them, are diminished in terms of their humanity or where they originally came from, and that they are trapped within the Warframes that we force them to work for us through. And it says that they've been trying to get out. They're trying to drive themselves out of the Warframes, and yet they're all of this stuff. They're devouring this banquet of suffering because they are just continuing to try and try and try, and they're obese with heat and acid and rage. And then he says that they'll destroy us all. He says that the Warframes will destroy them, not the Tenno. Which again makes me think that potentially we went to sleep and the Warframes just did their own thing. So there's that. Anyway, moving on. Oberon. Greed and denial will seduce any destruction, even our own. We're blind to future consequence, casting our debts on those to come. But what if now the Grey Mother sought revenge? A brutal thorn piercing the gushing ulcers of waste and industry. I can't speak today, apparently. A new green, sown upon sanguine ground, fertilized with the blood and bone of its defilers. So it says that we're, or the Orokin were courting their own destruction, and that they're blind to future consequence, and throwing their debts on those to come and all the rest of it. Fairly straightforward things to understand, really. But the thing that jumps out to me here is the Grey Mother. So is that is that Earth itself, or is that something else? That's one of the things that stands out to me from here, because otherwise it's fairly straightforward. We have destroyed the world, and this is what's come of it. And as a result of that, we've now got Oberon as a potential means to ensure that we pull back a little bit. Maybe it's an odd kind of thing. But then we've got the sacrifice teaser, and this was where we saw Excalibur Umbra kind of just jumping into frame. And so with the Umbral Warframes seem to be Warframes that have been out in the black, out in the other systems outside of the Origin system, or out in the darkness of space outside the edges of the solar system. And so they're Warframes that have been disconnected from Tenno control. And so seeing the Excalibur Umbra, if you could trade, would you? Surely. But all miracles require sacrifice. For their life, yours. So here it's going, if you could trade between the life that you have, or the life that you kind of have generally, would you trade? And this is the thing. I don't think he's talking to us. I think he's talking to what went into the Warframes. I think he's saying, would you, if you could trade, would you? If you could trade your place with the children in in their sleep, their never-ending sleep with all of those powers, would you? Of course you would. You'd be able to sleep all the time, and you'd have all these crazy powers. But all miracles require sacrifice. The Warframes, miracle, spiritual, ethereal gods of war unleashed by the Orokin, unleashed by the Executors and the Emperors above them. So for that to happen, for the Warframes to become a thing, someone needed to be sacrificed. And that sacrifice was the person he's speaking to. Theoretically, the person who is inside the Excalibur Umbra that we see in that trailer. So again, it's not even just that the people who were being created and then infected with technocyte and thrown into the Warframes were unaware of what was going on. Or at the very least, Ballas was talking to them. They might not have been educated. They might not have been aware. Maybe there was no point in doing that for them, and they were just combat trained so that there was muscle memory and then left with it. Who knows? But beyond that, there's nothing else to it. It's a case of someone had to be sacrificed to make the Warframes, to create this miracle. And whoever it was that got created got thrown in. Maybe we'll actually learn more about the Warframes, the people that went into them, once Umbra turns up. Who knows? Because again, Umbra meaning shadow, it could mean that they've been out in dark space, but it could also mean that if we are the light, with the light that shines from the void and all that kind of thing, light so blinding that it blinded Margulis, our shadow in the way that we operate would be the shadow mind of each Warframe that we subjugate whenever we take control of one, wouldn't it? So it's going to be interesting to see if we actually get to learn more about who went into the Warframes. Because this is the thing, once the Warframes were settled on, seemingly with the Primes, then they got mass produced. So in theory, they wouldn't have gone about reinfecting people, redeveloping people. It would have been a process of, right, now we've got this one gene strand that works with this configuration, that works with this Warframe armor, that we put all together and it does this. Right, in which case we create vat loads of that type of tissue in this configuration, we infect it with this amount of technocyte, put it in the Warframe armor, and then stick it through transference so that the kids get control of it. But anyway, Mirage. Oh, how you suffered to become this beast, yet you laughed at me. Others writhed and raged in the vice, but you played the fool, and so it was that you distorted my design. A sanguine trick, a murderous comedy, but no one is laughing anymore except you, the mere vapours of your life shimmering still. Now, I feel like, as many other people have said, that Ballas here is talking about Margulis. So I think the beast that he's talking about is that I think the Jade Light forced Margulis to become our handler. And I feel like potentially that's where the sentient Lotus or Natar infiltrated. And so how you suffered to become this beast. So that whatever the Jade Light did, it caused her to become a beast. Well, what would an Orokin consider to be a beast? Something lower than Orokin. Something lower than him. And the Sentients as an enemy were formidable, but they were lower. They were this creation, this monstrosity that had been allowed to grow out of control. And he goes, but you laughed at me. You writhed and raged in the vice, but you played the fool. And so, yeah, so she writhed and raged in her confines as our handler. She tried to get out. She tried to find loopholes. She tried to find a way to help us and not just send us off to war every time. And so it was that you distorted my design. The design being that he had created this collection of godlike Warframe warriors for himself, and she then was twisting them. She was talking to the children. She was getting them on side. Maybe she was also interacting with the Warframes, as said, to then take control of them to launch her attack. And he goes, a sanguine trick, a murderous comedy. That's where I think that, yeah, she went and destroyed everything. I feel like Lotus is the one that actually did it herself. She took control of the Warframes. I feel like that's the sanguine trick. The murderous comedy was the murder of as many executors, the collapse of the Empire, the killing of the emperors, and all that. But no one is laughing anymore, because no one's around to laugh anymore. Except you. The mere vapours of your life, whatever was left of her after the Jade Light that seems to still be inside Lotus, is shimmering still. So Margulis, my thinking is potentially that the Jade Light might be the mechanism by which to create or a similar mechanism to the one that creates cephalons, apart from instead of it creating a new conscious thing that is able to project at large, it maybe compacts so that you are stuck in your own little box of your mind just running round and round and round, possibly rinsed of various things, or possibly, as we know, the memories were rinsed from Auden, and his defiance was rinsed from him before he became Ordis. I feel like maybe the Jade Light drives some of your biggest insecurities, worries, all of those things back on yourself. And yet, somehow Margulis was able to overcome that. Maybe it was purely the case of when Lotus infiltrated and became our handler, if Lotus still had, if there were still elements rather of Margulis in there for Lotus to interact with, then it was just an uptake thing that transpired. You know, her fragments left in the system that then filtered into Lotus, and so, you know, the mere vapors of her life. Yeah, whatever was left in the system after she got, you know, jade lighted. You know, the same way we see the fragments of Ordis spread everywhere. But they're still shimmering, and they've been picked up. So it's interesting. Lots of people have otherwise connected it to the way that Lotus reacted to Mirage, and maybe Mirage was one of her favorites and all that kind of thing. I don't feel like Ballas cares about that in what he's saying here, and so that's why I'm veering towards him just being descriptive. Because this is the thing. I feel like if we were stood face to face with Ballas, then yes, he might have reason to lie to us. Here, we're reading his logs. We're hearing his inner thoughts. We're hearing the things that he has said to others about certain warframes or certain ideals and events that are going on during the old war. And I think that stands out. So as a result of this, though, just to summarize, we've got a lot of information on what seems to have gone into the Warframe, specially designed gene seeds that have then been turned into people. Those people have been tested in really brutal fashion, infected with technocyte, possibly tested some more, and then captured, turned into Warframes, and only the massive will of the Tenno, because it is enhanced by this void power, has allowed us to has allowed the Warframes to be controlled. We seem to have elements of how Margulis has potentially managed to work things out beyond her death, or beyond the point that she got hit with the Jade Light, and potentially it's the fragments that are in Lotus that Ballas wants to extract. If he could get enough Kuva, would he be able to do something about it? Would he be able to rinse Natar out of Lotus? We don't exactly know how Margulis and Natar come together to be Lotus, because she seems to have the body of Margulis for Ballas to recognize, and also for the fact that she'd taken off her helmet and she's probably blind or possibly disfigured above like this point of her face. So we'll have to see about that. But otherwise, we've got a set of other interesting things that we can take away from this in regards to the attitudes that Ballas has. Some people have suggested that maybe he was this Machiavellian schemer behind all of it, and he was the one that killed the Orokin. He was the one that set all of this in motion. He's potentially made deals with everybody. I don't think so, because I feel like when he's saying that is why they will destroy us, he's talking about the erosion of them as a culture, I feel. Yeah, the erosion of their situation, of how we have become this thing that is numb. But at the same time, we are so caught up with these things and distracted by them because they're everything that we wished we still felt. And that's why we may very well lose some of ourselves. Some of the control and this kind of thing that we have risen above to create our shimmering beauty. It's going to crack our facade, our visage, our composure, because we've got these things around. I don't think he's being literal in that instance. But either way, guys, that's my rundown of this, and as said, I think that gives us details on a lot of stuff, because this guy is one of the only people that's come out and just told us things. And he hasn't even told us things to our face. It's stuff that we've picked up kind of almost via osmosis as memories and things have been coming back, or tangentially through other stuff. At some point I want to go through the codex. At some point I want to talk about things like Kuva, because lots of people have been likening it to things like the Philosopher's Stone. No one's been looking at the effects that we actually see in the game, seemingly, and that's something I want to take a look at. But anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the video tomorrow. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.